Welcome to Flow Brewing. Today we are going to be kind of going over the brew process that I went through about 2 weeks ago, and we're really going to be focusing on brewing with nuts. So as the fall approaches, everybody wants to brew a nut ale and a pumpkin ale. So this year I thought that I would brew a brown nut ale. We're going to call it Treasured Nut. And I kind of want to talk about a little bit of the thought process that went into this. There's two ways that you can primarily brew with nuts, and then there's infinite many combinations based on the nuts that you use. When in the process you put the nuts in, and any variable that you change will alter the outcome of the beer. So this time, what we decided is we were going to brew a base brown ale. We used a base of Maris Otter, combined it with a 2-row, because I don't think that you get the benefit for using 100% Maris Otter base. I don't know that you can really taste the difference if you add in a little bit of 2-row. And we do that primarily because 2-row is more prevalent here in the area that I live in, and the Maris Otter is a nice, more malted Maris Otter that gives you just a big, full flavor. And honestly, if you have a lot of Maris Otter, four malted Maris Otter available to you, I would encourage you to go with that as your full base. But I don't think that I'm losing out much on the flavor. And I think that it's important to use what you have when you can. Then we went with a dark crystal malt for head retention, flavor, and body. And then we also used a few other specialty malts to kind of contribute to the flavor. And I'll go over those here in a little bit. So the basic brewing process still applied. We mashed very high so that there would be a lot of residual sugars left in this to give it a sweeter, more full-bodied flavor. And I think that's important to remember what the outcome that you're looking for as you brew the beer. When we mashed in with this, one of the options when you're brewing with nuts is to chop those nuts in and actually mash in with those to get that nutty flavor up front, and then you've got the whole boil where you're going to break down those compounds, change them, especially with the hops, as the hops isomerize and you're creating that Maillard reaction fusing the sugars and the amino acids. Then you're going to get a little bit different flavor than if you put the nuts in at post-boil in the fermenter. So what we decided is I was going to make 10 gallons, going to do the brown ale as a base without nuts to make sure that I nailed the brown ale recipe. I'm going to submit that to competition at the foam cup to see kind of what I get. And then we're going to take 5 gallons of that, and I am going to add some toasted pecans. And the way that we went about toasting those pecans, you'll see in the video, but we layered it with honey, then put raw brown cane sugar onto the nuts, and then drizzled it with some Madagascar vanilla. And when I was done with that, I drizzled the honey over it again, sprinkled it with brown sugar, and then I toasted the nuts for 50 minutes. Each 10 minutes, for the first 30 minutes, I pulled the nuts out, flipped them on the tray, put them back in, and then let them go the last 20 minutes. I noticed that one of my trays, could have been the convection in my oven, was toasting a lot more and getting a much more intense, caramelized, black, almost molasses look and feel to them. So at that point, I pulled them out. There's two things for that. One, I used a different tray. I had a steel tray versus an aluminum tray, and possibly I could have had the honey amounts different in the two trays to the amount of nuts, but more than likely it was just the convection in the oven and then the metal and the way that the heat came up through that metal. So anyways, a little bit different consistency, but at 15 minutes when I saw that, decided to pull those nuts out. And then I let them cool on wax paper overnight, and they get incredibly sticky. This is a very difficult thing to deal with and do. I did not put any sort of olive oil or butter or anything on the bottom of my tray because I didn't want that buttery characteristic getting into the beer, giving it a diacetyl tone. That may or may not have happened, but that was one of the decisions that I made. Some of the key things to remember is this is going to be dependent on your process. In my process, I do not have a pump right now where I'm recirculating that mash. So my mash is somewhat limiting to the amount that I'm getting out of my grains. And then I hit my numbers spot on going into the boil kettle. So I got the exact brown ale that I was shooting for. But again, that's why I did 5 gallons without the nuts. So some of the decisions that I may alter as I go into this are I may not in the future use the Crystal 80. I may go with a Crystal 120 and kind of see if I get a little bit more burnt sugar, plum, dark candy sugar, raisin type flavors out of that crystal malt. Otherwise, that's kind of the process. I'll let you guys kind of look at some of the notes as I went through this brew day. And then as we move into, this has been a long time since my last video, but one of my goals is to start publishing a bit more. I've been incredibly busy as everyone is, but blessed. But going to publish more, and the next post we'll be talking about the lautering process and the mash and kind of gauging your efficiency, and then we may start moving into equipment and talk about pumps, recirculation in the mash, and that's effect on lautering. So anyways, thanks for tuning in. Love to hear your comments, thoughts, and experiences with as far as brewing with nuts. Looking to make this beer again, and we will mash in with the nuts and talk about the flavor differences that we get, and then we can also talk about adding additional flavors like Saccharomyces, Brettanomyces in the fermentation chamber when we put the nuts in to give it more of that Belgian style sourness in a brown ale as well. So those are all the different sort of options that are out there. And I think that's why there's going to be no shortage ever of craft breweries or home brewers that are able to create their own unique products that are a little bit different. Because no matter what the brewer is, no matter what the process is, there's going to be infinitesimal many combinations to make a different ale. And I think that they can all turn out exceptionally well. So anyways, hope you enjoy this brew day, and love to know your thoughts, and we'll be back shortly in October with the lautering and mash process and how that affects your final brew. So cheers. Welcome to Flow Brewing. Today it's August 31st, and it's the first day of college football season. And in honor of that tradition, we are brewing. We today are going to brew a brown ale that we're going to use the yeast strain from this and blend it to use for our upcoming IPA for Foam Cup. So today we're focusing on a couple different things. I'm getting ready to publish some information on mash efficiency and calculating your mash efficiency and shooting for the target to shoot for to hit your target gravity, and making sure that you're being as efficient as possible with your mash. Now, as a home brewer, it's not that big of a deal, but I still think it's important to pay attention to so that you make sure that your system is dialed in. Today we are making this brown ale, And we're going to do a little different mash today, because we are going to mash in with almost our entire boil volume and then sparge very sparingly. Now, there's been some studies done that have shown that you don't want to sparge beyond about 2 Play-Doh. So I feel like that I get better results and better flavor if we do a full mash in with essentially the full boil volume, and then just rinse the grain bed to get the last residual sugars out of it. And given that I've got the space to do that, that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to keep this mash very high because we're going to make a toasty, nutty brown ale that we want lots of residual sugars left in it. And then we're going to dry hop 5 gallons with toasted pecans. So stay tuned. Look for the literature that I'm going to publish on mash efficiency and calculating the proper efficiency for your system. And hopefully you'll find it useful for your future brewing. Thanks for tuning in. We have finished mashing in, and we have a brown ale ready to go. Our target temp was maintained. We are at 158, and we were shooting to be at 160. So this should have a lot of residual sugars and sweetness. We got our full mash volume, so we're going to take a refrac reading and see where we're at. And then we've got our sparge water here heating up, and we're going to sparge about 4 gallons through there just to get the remaining residual sugars after this thing runs out. New technique that I'm using just to make sure that I get the best wort possible, and I see no decrease in efficiency. I'll do some efficiency studies and post my numbers before too long, but you know, I think that I get a lot better wort this way, and it's actually a little bit faster because you're not spending as much time sparging. So anyways, pretty cool, and we're gonna go ahead and get this into the boil pot and get it on boil. Brew on. We have the sample from our first runnings, and as always, like we always recommend, that you do sample that first running. And that's very good. That's essentially what we were looking for. We were looking for, it's got a nice nutty sort of toffee background with a nice sweetness to it. It's not super big, so it'll be drinkable. And I think it's going to let the nut shine on the dry hop. So a very good brown ale base, and getting a little bit of astringency or some like tannins or something from the grain husk, but it's got a nice caramel sweetness and some bready toffee notes. So I think we're in good shape, and we'll take a few notes, and then we'll taste it after boil. Here we have our final boil of 14.25 gallons, and it's a little darker than I had hoped, but it's a little hard to tell how it'll ferment out and sit in the glass after it's crash cooled. It finished right at 1040, so I was just barely off my estimated final gravity, which is good. And we'll do a taste test soon, but otherwise it looks pretty good. The only thing that I'm thinking is we might dial back the chocolate malt if we were to brew this again, but the taste and the final color are really going to be the drivers for that. So we'll check it out. So we took our sample here. This is the final wort that we are getting ready to pitch. We will take a little sample here and see what it tastes like. Got a nice sweet aroma. Oh my, it's much more bitter than anticipated, which is kind of a drawback. It's got a nice caramel kind of smoothness to it and sweetness, but it is quite bitter. The yeast will eat some of those bitterness units away during fermentation. So I know that it's right about 15 IBUs, so it'll be really interesting to see how it ferments out. And hopefully it chews up some of that bitterness and we get some of that sweet bready toffee note that I taste in the background that the bitterness is kind of hammering away at. Pretty good little beer. Overall in the pot it looks a little darker than expected. I think Beersmith in general, on the color, kind of overestimates on the light side of what the color of the beer actually will be. So I think I'm going to start dialing back some of my dark grains appropriately, keep them more in line with Brewing Classic Styles recommendations as far as the percentage of the grain that we are going to shoot for, instead of going with shooting for the color that we see in Beersmith. I'll have a few more thoughts here in a little bit, but for now we're going to get this cooling and get the yeast pitch. Cheers. Welcome to Flow Brewing. Tonight we are toasting the pecans for our nut brown ale, and as you can see I did both trays the exact same, and this tray over here, which ended on the bottom rack, toasted quite a bit more, whereas this tray is a lot lighter. I've kind of debated about toasting them longer. They've gone 50 minutes at this point, and I think I'm going to set them out on wax paper, let them dry out, and see how they look like in the morning. I'm concerned that if I continue over here that they will just burn, and we won't get the desired toasty caramel burnt brown sugar flavors that we're looking for, and it'll just be a burnt, kind of burnt toast flavor. So the recipe, or the method that I used, was I decided to put a layer of honey with a layer of brown sugar, and then I layered it with Madagascar vanilla, and then I did another layer of honey and brown sugar. I don't know. I don't know if they actually toasted enough. The honey did not seem to go away and allow the nuts to really toast. However, I think that it's going to provide a lot of fuel for the beer when we put it in the fermenter, and I will let that ferment out, and then hopefully I'll get some nutty background as well, and some complexities from the sugars as well. Hopefully I have caramelized the sugars to a point to where they won't ferment out, and it'll leave a nice sort of raisiny caramelized sweetness in the background, as opposed to fermenting out super dry. I'm going to go ahead and get these on wax paper to let them dry out overnight, and then we'll pitch them in the morning. And so anyways, that is the method that we used to toast these nuts. We're going to have 5 gallons that has no nuts, and then this 5 gallons, which I'm going to put 2 pounds of nuts in. Originally I had decided to go with 1 pound. However, after researching it and looking at some other nut browns, it seemed like that some people who had tried it before did not get the nutty flavor that they were looking for with 1 pound. So therefore we went with 2. And I think this is about the most that I would put in 5 gallons, given the amount of displacement that will take place in the fermenter. So we will put this in there tomorrow and monitor it, see how she comes out, and then we will probably make this beer again, chop these up
And I may even do the same process. I may do this beer twice more. I may do this, then chop them up and mash in with them. And then I may just chop up the pecans into small little pieces in the food processor, mash in with them to get some of that pecan flavor in the mash. Go ahead and brew the beer, and then dry hop it with this method. So anyways, this is phase 1 of this experiment, and I'd encourage you to post your comments and thoughts on your toasted nut brown ales. And if you did any other ales where you pitch nuts, I'd also be interested. So anyways, thanks for tuning in, and we will have some more information coming shortly. Cheers.
Welcome to Flow Brewing. This morning we pitched probably about 1.75 pounds of toasted pecans. Last night, as those pecans came out of the oven, it was really, really difficult to get them off the tray. We got most of them harvested, let them sit on wax paper overnight, and then here we will zoom in, and you can kind of see them up top there. But they, even though we toasted them for at least 50 minutes, there's still a lot of residual sugars in there, and my airlock has started to take off again. You really can't see it too well right there, but you can start to see the yeast activity increasing with those residual sugars. So hopefully this doesn't dry out too much, but this is a good ale yeast that won't get super dry, and it should leave some fruity notes. And hopefully I toasted those pecans long enough that some of the more complex sugars will still remain in those nuts. We're going to let this go ahead and go another 2 weeks. This one we are going to pull out and put in our other cooling chamber and let it crash cool. And then we'll let that go for a week, and then we'll keg, and then looking forward to tasting this over the next month. Check us out here in another month, and we should have a good taste testing, and we're going to enter this in the upcoming foam cup. Cheers.